Yeah, 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 yeah. All right. Yeah. So thanks for asking.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, sir. Good to see you.
You too.
How'd you look good? Mr. Vice President? I haven't in a long while. I need to get back. No, I haven't. So, Pastor Johnson and I chat on occasion. More, I will tell you, more places of worship are kind of slowly in-person worship. Now, I don't know what lies or still positivity is going to be, but I think if you've been vaccinated, yeah, let's ask. I think it's great.
Your Honor?
Yeah, I'm ready. Monroe wants me to keep it short and sweet.
Be brief.
It wouldn't be a presentation without Monroe saying, "Hey,
This mic is on, so whatever you guys say, it's
okay,
on camera.
all right. They just messed it up.
They messed it up.
They come in.
Oh, they okay. Just makes it okay.
They come in and make that.
I see. Stages.
Later, how you doing? Good to see you.
How are you, Ted? Good, thank you. Good to see you.
I know Dan's got his stuff. Probably 2:30. Let us know.
Thanks for having me.
Can we get the camera a bit closer?
We're going to have another meeting. Jared.
have my computer, and he's like, we don't need to go over that. So no.
My biggest question is to know if your state because I think all that
Well, and so that's one of my questions is, can we do
I guess
it
we
amend?
could probably do it in like
Right.
next year is like a fiscal year because we just get getting some more money from the state, so just going.
Well, and then, like, right, so this is,
I just don't know.
so that's one of the questions is, can it be done, like, with the next fiscal year? Or can we have that reimbursement, something calculated, to the way it's like my budget, I don't know. But if we could do it, I mean, that's, I don't know. Okay, Bob's ready, we're ready. He's just, so, if we need to meet, and I'm gonna talk to him.
I think that it's in the budget. Like the stuff is actually in the budget. It's a line item in there. Yeah, they didn't actually show us what's out in the budget. But so we're taking this. That's why I walked out and I said, Senator Taylor. I said, this is all just taking their word. They've got approved documentation. They're saying that there is a contract. It is a contract of services, not like leasing equipment or anything like that.
Even though it said it was equipment,
That's where, and then their point was that they don't do the filing, that their accounting firm does the filing, so they've been filing it wrong. He said that they've been putting 30 hours for, he said he went
Good evening, councilors. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We will begin our meeting with the prayer and pledge of allegiance, led by Councilor Carlino.
Thank you, Mr. President. Tonight, we are honored to have Pastor Damon Howell from District 6 Church, the Blended Church. Pastor Howell.
Thank you. Good evening, and thank you, Mayor Hogsett and the entire City Council for allowing me to come before you and open this session in prayer. I'm humbled and I'm honored. Before we pray, permit me just to lay out just a couple of quick things God laid on my heart to share with you this evening, and I will cover in my prayer. God sent me to share and proclaim that now is the time and this is your moment. Two individuals from God's word come to mind as I prayed about this evening, King David and Esther. As I think about all that is taking place in our beloved city and the monumental decisions that lie before all of you, I can't help but liken the situation to facing giants and being the individuals called upon, as it says in the book of Esther 4:14, for such a time as this. The people of Indianapolis and the world are navigating a pandemic. Tough issues such as crime prevention, housing and infrastructure, economic stability, racial and gender equality, all giant issues that you face in this council. But I ask you, what is in your hand? David had a mere sling and 5 smooth stones. Esther faced a life or death decision. Both of these individuals triumphed straight from the book of Zechariah 4:6, saying it was not by their might, not by their power, but by the Spirit of God that brought the victory. And that is how I feel you all will also be successful in all that you are facing. Not through your might, not through your power, but through the power of God, and that will help you lead Indianapolis now and into the future. Psalms 127:1 says, unless the Lord builds the house, the builders labor in vain. Unless the Lord watches over the city, the watchmen stand guard in vain. From my experiences, forsaking God never turns out well. I encourage you to all turn to him. Lead the city to do what no other city is doing. Repent and welcome God back into our city. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. Dare to put God first again and see what happens. Join me in prayer. Heavenly Father, we come before you right now. I pray for the mayor and these city council members. I pray that if they don't know you personally, that they come to know and trust you, guiding every action that they take. Lord, bless their lives individually, bless their families, and a covering of protection, wisdom from you, God. I pray over that the very power of God in this place moves on each and every one of them and helps them to face the difficult decisions that lie before them. I pray over the work that takes place in this room. Guide the decisions that have to be made. May they be decision makers, and may they always see each other as children of God called to this time, with their minds being clear and focused. Bless the process that they are to undertake, Lord. In the tough moments of disagreement, may your Holy Spirit fill this very room and allow conversations to persist. God, may you never forget your people. May you look upon the work that needs to be done and the decisions that need to be made. And Heavenly Father, I pray for this city. I pray for Indianapolis. God, in your word, it says, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and will forgive their sin and heal their land. May that be our prayer today. May revival break out in our city, in our nation, and beyond. Father, we are praying for healing and protection from this pandemic, healing and protection over our youth, Heavenly Father, the next generation, solutions to the crisis that exists in healthcare, crime prevention, housing, racial and gender equality and reconciliation. May we all lay down our differences and seek you earnestly, Father. God, we give you all the praise and confirm all this can and will be done, and we trust this in the heavenly name of Jesus, and we all say amen.
If you will now join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Councilors, please select your green button to indicate your attendance. Thank you. We have 25 members in attendance. The next item on our agenda is introduction of guests and visitors. And we have as our guest today the Mayor of the City of Indianapolis, who we will recognize. Yes. Who we will recognize in just a moment under official communications. And with that, the next item on our agenda is official communications. We are honored this evening to have with us the Mayor of the City of Indianapolis, the Honorable Joseph H. Hogsett, to make his presentation of the city's proposed 2022 budget, and we look forward to working with him and the administration in the coming months as we craft the budget for 2022. Everyone, please welcome Mayor Joseph H. Hogsett.
Thank you. Thank you all. Well, good evening. President Osili, Vice President Adamson, Leaders Lewis and Mallory, to all of my colleagues on the City County Council, I am grateful for the opportunity to speak with you tonight. It is my privilege to present the City County Enterprise Operating Budget for 2022. The proposed 2022 budget represents the fifth consecutive budget submitted to the Council where revenues exceed expenses. Since the balanced budget that the Council passed in 2017, and thanks to your strong leadership and continued bipartisan collaboration, the city has received multiple credit rating increases that reflect a proven track record of balanced operations and responsible fiscal decisions. But I stand before you tonight mindful that the challenges facing our city are not simply fiscal. After decades of work by multiple mayoral administrations to combat the scourge of gun violence in our streets, a global pandemic and a national economic crisis have forced our city, Indianapolis, and nearly every other major city in the country to confront an epidemic that has cost too many lives. That is why tonight, in addition to the 2022 budget, I am also introducing a comprehensive financial package that leverages the full strength of the American Rescue Plan to invest more than $400 million in once-in-a-generation programming, including the single largest commitment to IMPD and community-based public safety efforts in our city's 200-year history. Together, this spending plan will focus on ensuring that Indianapolis remains a thriving, an equitable, and a safer city. Last year, you will recall, I gave this address virtually. As uncertain as that moment seemed at the time, we were still months away from the eventual deployment of 3 life-saving vaccines. As the impacts of the pandemic have continued to stretch on, I am proud that this council has joined me in the push for progress on behalf of all of the residents of the city of Indianapolis. We have launched efforts like Circle City Forward, seeking to repair, replace, and modernize neighborhood assets, including a multi-million-dollar investment in Indianapolis Parks facilities, a new DPW solid waste garage, and a modern forensics lab and coroner facility, just among others. The second round of Circle City Forward put $25 million into residential streets, those smaller arteries that we normally cannot address in an average construction season. Thanks to the support of the City County Council, every single district will see investment in much needed projects that have been overlooked for far too long. The last year has also included pivotal development victories that are leveraging the success of our downtown back into our neighborhoods. Chief among them is the announced relocation of Elanco's global headquarters to the site where the GM stamping plant once stood. This development will bring hundreds of jobs and more than $100 million in investment to the valley and surrounding neighborhoods. In addition, we have cut the ribbon on the first phase of 16 Tech. We have watched as the Emphasis corporate campus has leapt out of the ground at the site of the former airport terminal. And late last year, we marked the long-awaited opening of the Assessment and Intervention Center in the Twin Air neighborhood. This facility is providing better treatment for mental health and addiction for those who would otherwise wind up cycling through the criminal justice system. We mobilized resources and our experience as a host city to organize some of the most significant sporting events America has seen since the beginning of the pandemic, most prominently the entirety of March Madness. So to our civic partners, including the United Way of Central Indiana, the Indy Chamber, Employ Indy, the Indianapolis Arts Council, Visit Indy, and the Indiana Sports Corporation, and many more. These are organizations who have implemented innovative and creative solutions that have kept Indianapolis going. And to them all, I say, thank you. To our human service providers who have stepped up in the face of unprecedented challenges and continue to ensure that our most vulnerable residents receive the care and the support that they need and deserve, I say thank you. To our corporate and philanthropic community who found new ways to show up for their employees, for their neighbors, and for our city, I say thank you. And to our health care professionals, our frontline workers, our public safety officials, and of course, Dr. Virginia Kane and the Marion County Public Health Department. Tonight, I thank each and every one of you for your relentless efforts to combat COVID-19. Tonight's fiscal proposal seeks to meet the moment that we find ourselves in and create transformative change with investments including a $20 million commitment for the development and preservation of affordable housing, as well as over $40 million for other housing and neighborhood redevelopment efforts. Over $22 million in 2022 for small business support, workforce development, and economic recovery programming. A 3-year, $17.5 million plan to upgrade and invest in more of our neighborhood parks. And nearly $3.5 million in funding for arts and cultural programming, including direct grant dollars for small and diverse institutions. In today's world, where working from wherever is increasingly commonplace, we will ensure that Indianapolis remains an attractive city for businesses, companies, and talent. We will also ensure that Indianapolis, as the economic engine for Central Indiana and the state, can continue to support the infrastructure needs of our area. For example, during the 2021 construction season, Indy DPW programmed $167.5 million in total capital projects. Over the next 3 years, we will invest substantial resources into much-needed infrastructure projects, including $50 million of American Rescue Plan funding for projects that will prevent flooding in our neighborhoods and repair city streets. Additionally, tonight, I have submitted a fiscal ordinance for a third phase of Circle City Forward that will allow us to invest $25 million in greenway and trails projects. In total, DPW's infrastructure capital plan will receive an additional $125 million in new investment, putting us on pace for a historic $1.1 billion of spending since 2016, all without raising taxes or privatizing more assets. Thank you, Zach. But we haven't just been investing in bricks and mortar of our community. We're also continuing to strengthen our city's social safety net. This year, $6 million went into Operation Feed Indy, a broad and sweeping effort to bolster resources for those who already were or who soon became food insecure during the pandemic. Tonight, I'm proposing an additional $6 million of investment of American Rescue Plan dollars next year, dollars that will allow us to invest in neighborhood-led solutions, as well as provide continued support to our major partners fighting hunger. Throughout the past year, federal money has accelerated our community plan to end homelessness to the tune of over $20 million, allowing us to offer beds to any neighbor experiencing homelessness. And since the start of this year, we've placed more than 220 individuals from shelter into housing. We've continued our Pathway to Employment effort, connecting residents experiencing homelessness with resources and jobs. And we've sustained our Housing First strategy, increasing the goal of our Housing to Recovery Fund to $10 million. In addition, I am proud to announce tonight that our spending plan sets aside $12 million for our first city-constructed low-barrier shelter and comprehensive services facility. Thank you. Now, this watershed investment will be guided by studies already underway, evaluating the specific needs of our homeless neighbors and bringing together community partners that will allow us to transition individuals to permanent supportive housing. As the COVID recession took hold, our efforts to keep more residents housed went into overdrive. To date, our rental assistance program has distributed more than $53 million to landlords across Marion County, helping more than 23,000 families stay in their homes. As we continue to battle the pandemic, we know that incomes are still being impacted. So tonight, I'm very proud to announce that we are submitting a proposal to this council that would allow us to partner with the state of Indiana to add up to $100 million additional dollars for our rental assistance program. Now, as meaningful as all of these accomplishments have been, they're not what I want to focus on tonight. While Indianapolis is a unique place in so many ways, I speak to you tonight as our city finds itself exactly like every other major American city in one tragic respect. Indianapolis has experienced a tidal wave of gun violence that has swept across the United States, in no small measure as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. I want to be clear. While our community reels from the effects of this national trend, the impact of each and every one of these acts of violence have been devastatingly personal. Across the city, residents are justifiably angry at a culture of death that has been fueled by an oversupply of guns and a deficit of hope. But the acknowledgement of pain felt by those scarred by gun violence is meaningless without action. The compassion we all feel is insufficient if it does not translate into change. That is why the historical fiscal package I present tonight is aimed squarely at addressing the gun violence epidemic in our city. To understand where these resources will take us, it is important to first acknowledge the work that took place before COVID-19 brought the world to its knees. 4 years of work with this body to fund the hiring of 150 more police officers and the creation of the innovative Crime Gun Intelligence Center. 4 years of working with this body to increase the amount of grant funding for grassroots organizations fighting cycles of violence by more than $1 million. 4 years of working with this body to make investments in long overdue technology aimed at increasing community trust, like body cams, or increasing police effectiveness, like our B-Link program. 4 years of working with this body to focus on treating substance abuse and mental health issues rather than just arresting those who suffer. 4 years of working with this body to deliver in this budget, the first time since 1996, in which zero tax dollars will go to private jail facilities. But tonight, I have to be blunt with all of you about where we now find ourselves. All the programs and the policies we put in place over the last 4 years, working together, were rendered in just a matter of a few months, completely incapable of dealing with the scope of the crisis facing cities coast to coast. But we have not sat idly by and simply watched this tragedy unfold. Since the start of the pandemic, working with the City County Council, we have increased funding, staffing, and support for intimate partner violence prevention programming, promoted resources that address the devastating mental health toll of the pandemic, enhanced IMPD's data infrastructure to facilitate a real-time gun violence reduction strategy, enacted critical reforms to improve trust and collaboration between neighborhoods and law enforcement, and finally, we've added additional funding for community groups working with at-risk young adults. We have also said loudly and clearly that no American city, including Indianapolis, possess the resources to scale our strategy to meet the need of a public health crisis that has shaken the local economy to its foundations and has uprooted the social fabric of everything from child care to K-9 education. Thankfully, I stand before you tonight to acknowledge and give thanks that our advocacy did not go unheard nor unheeded. And earlier this year, the American Rescue Plan was signed into law, which has provided our city with a transformational opportunity to address the epidemic of gun violence head on. As a result, tonight, I submit a budget and a 3-year spending plan to address the effects of COVID-19, including more than $150 million directed toward an unprecedented anti-crime initiative. We will not do this by abandoning our data-driven strategy, but by harnessing these one-time resources and continuing our work to modernize our law enforcement agencies. That's why tonight I'm asking this council to invest $9 million over the next 3 years in modern crime-fighting technology, including cameras and license plate readers in high-crime areas, digital evidence software, a 360-degree virtual training system, and the launch of a gunfire detection pilot program. We will do this not by assigning more tasks to the men and the women of IMPD who have faced violence head-on, but by growing the size of our community-based police force. That's why tonight I am asking this council to fund an additional 100 police officers who will be exclusively assigned to community patrols. And I am proposing the expansion of our Division of Civilian Public Safety Officers within IMPD that will focus on non-emergency situations and paperwork, freeing our sworn law enforcement officers to focus on gun violence. We will do this not by abandoning our dedication to gun violence intervention, but by doubling down on these efforts. That's why tonight I'm asking this council to hire 2 new recruit classes of peacemakers, growing the program to 50 public servants trained to assist police in preventing conflicts and expanding our group violence intervention policy work. We will do this not by forgetting our community partners, but by quadrupling our investments in their efforts and those associated with them who seek to break the cycle of poverty and violence that has entangled far too many families over the last year. And that's why tonight I'm asking this council to dramatically increase our anti-violence community grants, distributing $45 million over the next 3 years to groups who are devoted to fighting crime on our streets. And our violence reduction plan must be more than reactive, but proactive. And that's why we must focus on the root causes of violence. Tonight, I'm asking this council to fund $30 million of mental health programming over the next 3 years, as well as more than $10 million in 2022 for reentry, domestic violence services, training, and youth programming. To repeat myself, I am asking this council to work with me to allocate more than $150 million in funding toward these efforts, because there is no greater challenge facing our city than the pandemic-fueled scourge of violent crime. Every American city is struggling with this crisis, but tonight we have the opportunity to lead and not follow, to take advantage of this unique opportunity to break cycles of violence more than a decade in the making, to lift up our weary neighbors and lend backup to our brave law enforcement officers. This plan, once implemented, will save lives. This plan, once funded, will make our city safer. And perhaps just as critically, this plan, once approved, will provide much needed hope to the residents throughout the neighborhoods across our great city. They deserve it. So let's not hide the ball. While the federal funds that this body will consider over the coming months were tirelessly championed by Congressman Andre Carson, the American Rescue Plan did not pass unanimously. And Washington has continued to engage in partisan sparring about matters big and small. That's their fight. Let it play out on cable news. Let it play out on Twitter. That's not where our constituents live. And that's not where they expect us to focus. Because if we allow ourselves to fall victim to the gamesmanship of that cartoon version of politics, if we allow this council and this administration to be pulled into the insular black hole of anti-social media campaigns aimed at driving us farther apart, well, we risk squandering a monumental moment where the history books will say that the city-county government was tasked with matters of life and death. That's because at a time when vaccines are safe, widely available, and free, here is the reality. This year in Indianapolis, we have seen weeks where the deadliest effect of the pandemic has been lives lost to gun violence, not COVID-19. So, public safety, housing, violence reduction, hunger. Each of these investments are at their core anti-crime initiatives. Now, I know all too well that there will be some who see this massive investment And they will question the scope of our efforts, calling them too broad to address the problem of violence. There may be others who question the growth of our police department or the increase in our grassroots neighborhood anti-violence efforts. They will question why, in the midst of a simmering pandemic, our city is making such massive investments into crime-fighting programs. My answer is simple, and it has been affirmed by this council before. Gun violence is a public health crisis. We have invested in the manpower, the programming, and the technology that has allowed us to inoculate and protect the public from the virus. Now is the time to invest in the infrastructure to combat a much more complex but no less deadly threat to the lives and livelihoods of our residents. Now is the time to cast aside precedent and shed the burden of incrementalism that would prioritize safe politics over safe streets. Now is the time for this council to act, and to act boldly, to turn the tide against the scourge of gun violence. Now is the time. So together, let's get to work. I thank you.
Mr. Mayor, you and your staff are welcome to stay, but we will we'll wait a few moments for anyone who wishes to pass along now.
Thank you all again.
Thank you.
I'm sticking around just in case anything falls out of the spot. You got all of it. I'm not making trails. You know what?
Thank you, councilors. Now, Madam Clerk, would you please read any additional official communications?
Thank you, Mr. President. Ladies and gentlemen, you are hereby notified that regular meetings of the City County Council and Police, Fire, and Solid Waste Collection Special Service District Councils will be held in the City County Building in the Council Chambers on Monday, August 9, 2021 at 7 o'clock p.m. The purposes of such meetings being to conduct any and all business that may properly come before regular meetings of the councils. Sincerely, Vapposoli, President, City County Council. Ladies and gentlemen, pursuant to the law of the state of Indiana, I cause to be published in the Court and Commercial Record and in the Indianapolis Star on Friday, July 23, 2021, a copy of a legal notice of General Ordinance Number 20, 2021, Proposal Number 149, 2021, and General Ordinance Number 25, 2021, Proposal Number 185, 2021. Respectfully, Sarita Hughes, Clerk of the City County Council. Ladies and gentlemen, I have approved with my signature and delivered this day to the Clerk of the City County Council, Sarita Hughes, the following ordinances. Fiscal Ordinance Numbers 14 through 17, General Ordinance Numbers 20 through 25, Special Ordinance Numbers 6 and 7, General Resolution Numbers 5 and 6, Special Resolution Numbers 27 through 30. Joseph H. Hogsett, Mayor. Mr. President, this concludes the official communications.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. The next item on our agenda is the adoption of the agenda. Vice President Adamson, I believe you have a motion.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. I would move to amend the agenda to advance proposal number 249, 2021, currently in the introduction of proposals, to the first item of business under special orders, final adoption for action this evening. Application for funds is time sensitive, and the proposal requires passage before the next council meeting, and I so move.
Second.
All right, it's been properly moved and seconded. Madam Clerk, I would ask that you open up the board for us to take a vote. All those in favor, please press your green button. All right, the vote is 25-0. Do I have consent to adopt the agenda as amended? All right, thank you, councilors. Proposal 249 will now be placed on the agenda for action as the first item of business under final adoption. The next item on our agenda is approval of journals for July the 12th, 2021. Do I have consent? We will now proceed to presentation of petitions, memorials, special resolutions, and council resolutions. And this next item on our agenda is proposal number 284, which recognizes former State Representative Dan Forestal.
Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate the council taking the time this evening to remember former State Representative Dan Forestal. I am humbled to present this resolution with my fellow councilors. We are joined tonight by Dan's family and friends. And before reading the resolution, I'd like to share a few personal thoughts. So Dan was my state representative for 8 years. He represented his district with as much enthusiasm as any legislator. He fought for his constituents, taking a stand for their needs, pushing for a better Indianapolis and a better Indiana. But he was also one of the most approachable legislators I have ever met. You could count on reaching him when you needed him. And even when you didn't, if Dan saw you around the neighborhood or at a community event, he was always quick to say hi and shake your hand and ask if there was anything he could do. He is an inspiration for me and an inspiration for public servants everywhere. So therefore, I present a special resolution recognizing former State Representative Dan Forestal. Whereas Representative Forestal graduated from Roncalli High School in 2001 and received degrees in fire science, public safety administration, and public administration from Ivy Tech Community College, Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis, and Indiana University School of Public and Environmental Affairs. And whereas Forestal's career in public safety included service as a guard at Marion County Jail 2, a bailiff in Marion County Superior Court 11, and most recently as a lieutenant with the Indianapolis Fire Department. He was an active member in Firefighters Local 416, the International Association of Firefighters, and the Indianapolis Fire Department's Emerald Society. And whereas Forestal was elected to the House of Representatives, representing the 100th District in 2012, and re-elected in 2014, 2016, and 2018. He served as Assistant Democratic Whip and was the ranking Democratic member of the House Roads and Transportation Committee. And whereas Forestal additionally served his community by dedicating time to Habitat for Humanity, the Knights of Columbus, and the Wheeler Mission. And whereas Dan Forestal passed from this life on Wednesday, July 14th, 2021. Whereas the death of Dan Forestal does not diminish the profound body of work that he leaves as an example, nor our admiration of and affection for him as a dedicated public servant. And whereas the family and acquaintances of Dan are deeply saddened at his departure, as are all who were touched by his courageous spirit and kindness, and whereas Dan's legacy of faith and service will continue to inspire his loved ones and all who knew him, now, therefore, be it resolved by the City County Council of the City of Indianapolis and of Marion County, Indiana. Section 1, the Indianapolis City County Council recognizes the service and accomplishments of Dan Forestal, former state representative. Section 2, the Council offers the family of Dan Forestal our heartfelt thoughts and prayers and our sincerest condolences. Section 3, the mayor is invited, and he has signed to join in this resolution. Section 4, this resolution shall be in full force and effect upon adoption and compliance with IC 363414. The special resolution was sponsored by Councilors Adamson, Anay, Bain, Barth, Brown, Carlino, Jared Evans, Hart, Jones, Larison, Mascari, Potts, and Ray, and was passed by the City County Council this 9th day of August 2021. And Mr. President, I so move.
Second.
The motion has been properly moved and seconded. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Nay. The motion carries. Back to the Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. President. State Representative Forestal was more than just a public servant. He was a beloved family member and friend. My words could not do him justice regarding the love and friendship he gave to those around him. With your permission, I would ask that we invite State Representative Blake Johnson to share some words about Dan.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President, Councilor Larison, my former colleagues. Over the last 10 years, Representative Forestal and I became very, very good friends. First as neighbors. He lived across the street from me. Later as partners. I was on the council, and he represented the area in the State House, and we'd blame each other for things, which worked out quite nicely for both of us. And later just as very, very dear friends. What I want you all to know about Dan, for those of you who didn't know him well, is that he was always a fighter. Whether he was fighting in the State House for those who'd been discriminated against, whether he was fighting for the East Side to be a stronger and safer community, whether he was fighting against government waste at the BMV, which he was in the headlines a bit for, he never, ever stopped fighting. I will tell you that one of the last times I saw Dan, he and Mary Ann, his mom, were driving on Shadeland Avenue, and this car whips by me, and I see Dan Forestal hanging out the side of the car waving at me. And he called me right after that, and after talking briefly just about how he was doing, how things were going as he was continuing to battle his own challenges, he started diving in on all the things I needed to be doing at the State House. He always offered words of encouragement, always offered brotherhood and kindness, and I miss him dearly. So on behalf of Marianne, his mom, and the whole family, thank you for this resolution. Thank you for taking the time to honor Dan's life. And the last thing I'll say, because if Dan were here, he would make me do this, keep making investments in mental health and addiction services. Never stop going deeper and innovating more, because that's what we need in this community. And Dan's life should be a legacy to those efforts as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you, councilors. The next item on our agenda is proposal number 285, which recognizes the Franklin Township Little League Junior All-Star Team.
Takes a little longer with the hardware around their neck to get up, so give them 1 minute. Tuck in here. City County Special Resolution 32, 2021, a special resolution recognizing the Franklin Township Little League Junior All-Star Team. Whereas the Franklin Township Little League Junior All-Star Team won the 2021 Indiana 13 to 14-year-old Junior Little League State Tournament, and whereas Franklin Township Little League Junior All-Star Team defeated a very talented Silver Creek team. Their amazing commitment to each other, outstanding teamwork, and tireless dedication led the team to a 12-2 victory. And whereas Franklin Township Little League Junior All-Star Team became District 7 champions by defeating Eagledale Little League 13-1 in the championship game, and they became Section 3 champions by defeating Greenwood Little League in the final game in the best-of-3 series, 16-6. And whereas Franklin Township Little League Junior All-Star Team had a dominant state tournament run. It went 3-0 in pool play and won its semi and championship game on 2 Sundays ago, I believe it was, completing 5 games in 4 days, outscoring the opponents 45-13. That's domination. And whereas team members Camden Floyd, Drew Grimes, Joey Lawrence, Gavin Lynn, Ray Locklear, Micah, Monahan, Dylan Pearson, Alex Sorge, Cooper Sorge, Parker Sleeth, Christian Stinson, and Alex Toth were led by David Straub, the manager, Coach Brian Wood, Coach Connor McKenzie, and Coach Dave Grimes. And now, therefore, be it resolved by the City County Council of the City of Indianapolis and Marion County, Indiana, Section 1, the Indianapolis City County Council proudly recognizes the Franklin Township Little League Junior All-Star Team. Section 2, the council heartily congratulates the Franklin Township Little League Junior All-Star Team for their outstanding teamwork, commitment, dedication, and domination. Section 3, the mayor is invited to join in this resolution by affixing his signature hereto, which he has done. Section 4, this resolution shall be in full force upon adoption of the compliance with IC 36-3-4-14. This special, I hereby so moved.
Second. The motion has been properly moved and seconded. All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, signify by nay. Motion carries. Back to the speaker.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to congratulate these young men on their feat here. Quick math, I think it's quite prevalent that they have done a heck of a job with what they've done. You all should be very proud of yourselves. This doesn't come easy, and you have made it seem easy. And congratulations on that. And furthermore, I would like to invite one of the coaches up here to speak on behalf of the team here as well and give a couple words.
Thank you, Councilman Montgomery. Thank you, council members, for this great honor. And it's a privilege of mine to just introduce these young men and what a great representation they've been to our community, to our city, throughout the state. We're complimented on their attitudes and their great sportsmanship and exemplified Little League Baseball as first and top-notch individuals. Thank you for this honor. We are privileged to take this back to our community in Franklin Township. And once again, thank you, Congressman Mowry.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, again, I'd like to thank you all for being here. I know, and one of the things I want to thank too is every one of your parents. I know they're your biggest supporters, they're your biggest allies, and they want to see you succeed more than they want to see themselves succeed. I know all too well what that means, and make sure you really thank your parents and thank them for being at your games, thank them for supporting you on this route and on this journey, and make sure you're staying up to date in school and continue that win streak. I mean, you guys are doing a heck of a job. Congratulations.
All right, councilors, the next item on our agenda is the overview presentation of the proposed 2022 City County Council or City County annual budget overview presentation. King Clark, City Controller, will now present this brief overview of the 2022 proposed budget. Please note that this is purely for information purposes, and there will be no question or answer session, as comments and questions can be asked on specific areas of the budget during the various upcoming committee meetings. Mr. Clark, would you come forward, please?
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the council. It's a pleasure to be here, especially to see you all in person today, and presenting to you the 2022 budget introduction and our proposal for the mayor's office. I have been working with my staff, who I want to thank for the last 2 months, pulling together proposals, working with all of the agencies and departments to come up with a proposal for you to take under consideration through this process over the next 10 weeks. And in doing so, have tried our best to take into account what is a unique time in the city's history as we recover from the pandemic, but also is a challenging time as it relates to our revenues. And so I'll go into detail, a little more detail in this presentation, and then obviously through committee hearings, you'll hear the detail of all of the budgets through this process. As the mayor said, let's get to work. I'll go to the next slide. The 2022 budget really looks at our proposal looks at how we've done over the last 4 years specifically in generating balanced budgets, but also takes into account our approach to balanced budgets and to revenue as a whole over these last few years. Specifically, we continue to preserve fund balances, specifically have grown those balances where possible over these last 4 years, 5 years, and have been working towards making sure and protecting our credit rating as well. Those credit ratings are what allow us to do bond issues and to do large projects on behalf of our citizens here at the city, and so it's a critical piece of the equation that we're constantly thinking about. We also have found ways to make strategic investments in the city, county, enterprise, and in our neighborhoods wherever we can, as we always do. For the 2022 proposed budget strategy, similar, very strategic investments, a little less than we've been able to do in prior years. The operational budget, which is the majority of what I'm talking about tonight, is slim. There isn't huge growth. There is some growth in revenue, but it is not as substantial as we've seen in prior years. The pandemic unemployment numbers are catching up for 2022, so it's something we have to keep in mind in putting together an operational budget. But we continue with very conservative estimates around revenue and are anticipating a steady economic growth over time. So while this 2022 budget is a challenge, we know it will, as the recovery continues, it will continue to improve over the subsequent operating budgets. And of course, as with all of the mayor's budget proposals, there are no tax increases in this budget proposal at all. The next slide, please. There are two slides here to explain the past 5 years specifically and why we are in the position we are, the strong fiscal position that we are as we enter the pandemic and as we're coming out and looking towards economic recovery. In this first slide, you see underspend year over year. We have underspend in our budget every year. So the proposed budgets that this body has approved, each agency and department goes about and tries to operationalize everything that they've laid out to you. And oftentimes there is some underspend, either because hiring isn't at the anticipated levels, there are contracts that can't get signed in time, whatever may happen. Plans change. That happens within a budget. This underspend over these last few years has been a pretty historic number. When you look at that underspend, it means that fund balances are growing. And I'll show that more in our presentation here shortly. But it's continued to grow over this period of time. On the next slide, you see our collections are also above our estimates. So our revenue collections have been consistently above what our conservative estimates in revenue. That has been a part of the Comptroller's Office for many years and has been continued in this administration to ensure that we do not dig deep into reserves in putting together our budgets and that we have balanced budgets. And so this continued collections that are above our estimates actually allows us, again, growing fund balances even further than just the underspend does. On the next slide, you see the result. We have passed by this body a couple of policies, an unassigned fund balance policy and an unrestricted fund balance policy. These two policies say that we need to hold in certain funds a certain amount of a percent of our total annual budget to protect our credit rating and to protect our citizens in case something unexpected came up. We were incredibly lucky over the last 24 months that the federal government has chosen to actually pass legislation that provided money directly to local governments to let us respond. But you can't always count on that. And so the city continues to hold fund balances and has been careful in how we've approached our fund balances and spending in those because we aren't ever certain what may come. And with such strong economic times, we made the best of it. Truly, I think that we've actually grown the fund balances to make it a point where we are able to do things like we've done with Circle City Forward, historic investments out of our coffers that allow us to actually do good work in our neighborhoods and in our city for our citizens. Specifically, I'll point you to 2020. 2020, specifically, immediately upon the beginning of the pandemic in March of last year, we put reserves in place with every agency and department. We froze hiring and started restricting spending as quickly as we could. Not knowing what the federal government may do and not knowing whether or not there was going to be aid coming from state or federal government, we knew we needed to protect the city's finances so that we didn't have to reduce services or lay off any staff. And we were able to do that incredibly effectively. At this time last year, unemployment was in double digits in Marion County. And so not knowing what would happen and how fast the recovery would come, we held on fund balance until we saw a real recovery coming, which of course we have. The recovery has been moving along throughout the last year. So the result of all this is improvements in credit ratings across the board. We've been able to improve credit ratings for the city and county across the board. And in each presentation that we've been able to have, there's some highlights there for you to lay out some of the things the rating agencies have said specifically about our financial management. That is absolutely in conjunction with this fiscal body. It would not happen if we weren't all looking at this together and passing balanced budgets. The result of that is these improved credit ratings, allowing us to get what are now historic lows in bond issuances in terms of rates. And so that will allow us to continue to do that. On the next slide, it's impossible to talk about all about this without talking about the actual stimulus funding that's come to the city. The largest of which, of course, last year, $168 million in the Coronavirus Relief Fund passed in the spring of last year. A secondary CARES Act 2 passed at the end of last year, providing directly emergency rental assistance to us and modifying some of the rules around the CARES Act funding that we did receive. And now, subsequently, earlier this year, passing and the signing of the American Rescue Plan Act, the result of that being $419 million directly allocated to Indianapolis and Marion County. And let me be clear, that is Indianapolis and Marion County. There were direct allocations also to all 4 excluded cities and towns in the city, as well as the state having its own allocation. The amount of dollars allocated and that's only the Fiscal Recovery Fund. We also have the Emergency Rental Assistance Round 2 and the High Needs Allocation, and there's a number of other programs in the American Rescue Plan that we will continue to bring before this body to continue to seek out that federal funding. We see it as our job, and I'm sure the council does as well, to bring as much federal money back to Indianapolis and Marion County residents as we can. In this situation, that is absolutely our goal. Talking a little bit more about the economic recovery, this lays out for you how the recovery's gone just from an unemployment rate perspective. Unemployment alone is not the full story of the economic recovery. Even with unemployment at the rates it's at, we know there's a fair number of people we all know and of our citizens who were able to continue to work from home and didn't necessarily have an impact in their income. Some of those residents may have been paying higher income taxes than others. Others, some essential workers, also continue to work at rates that were lower than I think a lot of us would prefer. And that has changed. We're now in a workers' economy, and everyone can feel that. As this recovery moves on, you're seeing that pressure on wages. So that changes the equation for us as an employer, but it also keeps us in mind as we look at this recovery, what do we do to promote good jobs in this kind of economy? We want to build this economy stronger in Marion County than it was before the pandemic. That took many years during the last recession. When you think back to 2008 and 2009, the people who lost their jobs, some of them were the last to get into the recovery. Very focused, as you look at the American Rescue Plan Act, you'll see we're very focused on trying to bring people up and to move up. Because just unemployment numbers alone do not tell the full story. Underemployed citizens in our city and county are a critical piece of this equation. And they pay directly income tax and property tax. That's a part of the equation for us to be able to provide our services. So I won't go over each of these individually, but there's a number of things that we did, obviously, in the recovery and focused on in the recovery that I wanted to make sure were in your hands. I won't go into depth on that. So let's jump into the actual introduced budget. So all of that lays out the background of how we looked at and went into this new budget year. We do have a balanced budget proposal that we've submitted to the council. Our budget ordinance is balanced. And our growth was relatively minimal, but there is some growth that we've programmed specifically out. I will not, in these next few slides, be discussing what is in the American Rescue Plan proposal. That's a separate proposal. This is the operational budget. And this is a critical piece to think through as we present this budget and talk about it together over the next 10 weeks. One-time funding sources should not be operationalized in the budget. It will only look like we're just cutting budgets in future years when those revenues go away. We have to live within our means for our standard services. That is the budget we're proposing. Separately, you will have fiscal packages, and I'll talk about that in the last slide, that lay out the other pieces of the package we believe we can put in terms of one-time funding sources. And I know those questions will come up through this process, and I welcome them. I believe strong fiscal management for us and that protection of that credit rating is an operational-based budget that does not include federal funding at the level it is. It would make no sense for us to try to program that now and then cut budgets in 2 or 3 years. It's just not a place any of us want to be, nor does it set the right path for our citizens and taxpayers. Let's jump into the breakdown, and I'll go over these briefly. We'll obviously be talking these in depth. Property tax and income tax have always made up the majority of our revenue. Income tax has been a growing portion of that revenue over the last few years. You'll all be aware we also oftentimes, because of our relationship and the way it works with the Department of Revenue, have supplemental income tax distributions that often come to us in the spring. We do not program those supplemental distributions. We don't count on them when we put together the operational budget. The state can make determinations on how they actually lock in our revenue estimates for income tax, and because they dictate that, we never take a more aggressive approach on that, and we haven't in the mayor's administration. Intergovernmental funding coming from federal resources and grants, state grants, all those items also make up a large portion of our budget. And then charges for services and others here in a smaller capacity. In the next slide, it breaks down a little further, and so you can see really the size and scale of what income tax and property tax mean here in the city county government. Specifically, because of what we're dealing with income tax and the recovery, it's critical to look at this, specifically the 2021 estimated. This 2021 estimated number, specifically the income tax number at $405 million, is not what we budgeted at. During the pandemic last year, we made the decision to budget at a flat line $378 million in income tax because we knew there was a big hit coming. And we did not want to take any chances that we would not be able to recover. Again, we could not count on federal dollars. We had to make sure that we took care of the taxpayers here locally without that expectation that any more stimulus may come. And so holding at $378 million, you can see our 2022 introduced goes to $372. It was a shrink in income tax based on what we budgeted, but we're lucky. If we would have grown it fully to the 405, we would have had a cut to 372. You can imagine that would have been a really difficult budget season for all of us to go through, cutting budgets across the board, which is what would have been required of us. Luckily, property tax has been strong. This housing market is incredible, obviously, and we all know that. But you can see we've continued to see growth, specifically in property taxes, which has helped us move along and be able to actually program. So overall, when you see the 2021 estimated at $850 million in collections, and then the $832 that we're having in the 2022 budget, really looking from that $811 to $832, you can see there's money to program. It's not a lot, but we actually, I feel like, made the right budget move to not take that income tax growth at the time we did, and instead to put that in reserves and be prepared in case we didn't have additional revenue. Onto the appropriations side, as is pretty typical, the public safety initiatives and criminal justice services make up the majority of the budget. In addition, other public services are executive, legislative, and administrative services, and debt service and pension, which are requirements within our budget that we always take out of the top of the line. And then the breakdown by county agency, seeing a little bit of a shrink here in the sheriff's size. Specifically, as the mayor mentioned, the removal of a private jail contractor, but also another proposal we'll talk a little bit about is the new Metropolitan Emergency Services Agency and the agreement in partnership with the sheriff to have 911 dispatch move into that new county first responding agency. Reduce some budget there. The Superior Court at 16%, always the two largest in the county side. And then the breakdown from there. I won't go into great detail. The one thing I will note is that MESA is the new Metropolitan Emergency Services Agency, which I'll talk a little bit more later in the presentation. And on the city department side, the big three, as typical, IMPD making up the largest portion, IFD and the Department of Public Works pretty closely behind. DMD, which of course is a huge part of what you see in those intergovernmental transfers earlier in our presentation on revenue. Parks and Rec at 4%, Business and Neighborhood Services at 3%. So now I'm going to jump into the operational budget investments we were able to make. You'll hear about a lot of these in your committee presentations as each of the individual agencies and departments comes before committee. But I wanted to highlight some on the top of the line here so you have some awareness of what we're going into. On the law enforcement investment side, we're funding 22 new civilian public safety officers, reaching 40 total, to focus specifically on non-emergency situations. These are non-armed public safety officers, civilian side, who will actually be going out and doing work that helps support law enforcement, but is not specifically law enforcement required, requires a law enforcement officer. An expansion of the body-worn camera program continues. We've continued to add additional cameras where it made sense. We've added cameras to our detectives to allow them to utilize those cameras when they're off duty. We did not want a situation in which an off-duty officer did not have a body cam, so that's included. And the expansion of the data analytics program at IMPD. This was a one-time fiscal this body saw at the last full council meeting and approved to add a chief data officer, data analyst, as well as some data analysis tools requested by IMPD, and now we'll be moving towards operationalizing those. We will include that in the standard budget for 2022. On the criminal justice investment side, again, as the mayor said, for the first time in 25 years, there is no private jail operator in Marion County, first time since 1996. $7 million in Guardium Ad Litem within the Marion Superior Court. Guardium Ad Litem, for those who don't know, are advocates who work on behalf of minors in the court system to protect their interests. This has never been a fully funded contract, and for 2022 it is for the first time. Continued investment in the transition to the new community justice campus. As that campus opens, with the Adult Detention Center opening late in December of this year and the courts beginning operations in January of next year, there will be additional costs associated with that as we go through the process to make sure we're giving ourselves some room for the unknown. We have some budgeted line items to make sure that we can help support them to make sure that it operates flawlessly when it opens. Increased funding for additional staff, supplies, and pathology for the coroner's office. I think it's not news to anybody, especially those on Public Safety Committee, that the coroner's office has continued to need more resources. We've been focused on that. Circle City Forward, of course, is building them a new facility, a new $16 million facility that is badly needed. If you have not visited the coroner's facility, I encourage you to do so and to understand what they're working with and what they need. But also, we're making investments specifically in capital for them now, things that they need for their own safety of their staff, but also just increase in workload has resulted in an increase in their overall budget. Their budget amongst the county, I think, is the largest single increase outside of the election board, which is now having an election on after an off year of about 32% increase. And an investment in a case management system for the prosecutor's office. They've requested a case management system of their own to be built specifically for their work. Marion County obviously has the largest caseload in the state, and so they're looking for something more tailor-built and specific for them. On the next slide, we go into investments specifically in the root causes of crime. We're excited to have an expansion of the reentry program. 3 staff members, specifically city-county staff members, who will be housed at the new adult detention facility, helping those inmates as they come out with reentry. The expansion of the Assessment and Intervention Center, working with this council, we have built the Assessment and Intervention Center, opened the center, grown it now through a fiscal you passed to 24/7 operations, and in 2022 we will expand it to 60 beds by the end of next year, all of those being at a 24/7 operation. Expansion of the food policy and community nutrition program by 2 employees, and maintaining our $500,000 in annual funding for the Indy Food Fund as well. Within government services, I won't go into each of these individually, but these are thank you. These are expansions on staffing specifically within the city and county departments and agencies. DPW seeing some expansion around the engineering staff, as well as a new levee and channels group, something we don't have today, but will allow us to do real maintenance on levees and channels that hasn't been able to be done at any wide capacity today. Completion of the DPW second shift. Many of you remember approving the second shift as we talked about that with DPW a need for additional road maintenance work and operations work. Because of the pandemic last year, we paused the full expansion of that group. We are funding fully the expansion of that group, so we have a full second shift. We did pay increases for our park staff, which we are funding. And then creation of the Consolidated Emergency Services Agency. So this is the Metropolitan Emergency Services Agency. A lot of you have been around long enough to see different iterations and versions of this. The Emergency Management Agency prior to the Ballard administration, as well as what was called MECA, the Metropolitan Emergency Communications Agency existed. We're taking all pieces of first responder specific work, those who support first responders, and bringing that together into one county agency to manage it. So 911 dispatch from the sheriff's office will be moving over, and we'll be working through compensation to adjust compensation so we can fairly pay those staff, but also to be able to recruit. This is a really challenging time to recruit in those jobs, and we've continued to struggle with that. This is an intent to add more budget and to be able to grow that and make it a focus. The Indianapolis Fire Department has also agreed to take their dispatch telecommunicators and move them into this organization for the first time, bringing our dispatch together in many years. It also brings out of the Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department the Division of Homeland Security, what we would consider our emergency management and planning entity in the county, will be moving into this organization and out of IMPD. So as opposed to being in a law enforcement entity, being in a first responding entity, a little bit broader scope and reach that way. And then also, we will be including what is called public safety communications, the radio communications support mechanism within the county and really in the metropolitan area. They support outside of the county as well. That entire group will be moving out of the Office of Public Health and Safety and moving into the county agency, Emergency Services Agency. You'll be hearing that at the Public Safety Committee. Also some expansion for BNS and permit staff, which has been a challenging area for BNS. Additional personnel and community investments in DMD. We have 5 new FTEs in DMD and a big expansion for them, growing their staff. And some expansion for parks programming staff. On the capital equipment side, substantial investments. We are maintaining our 290 patrol vehicles. We made a 6-year plan that lays out 290 new police vehicles each year. Working with IMPD, we've got that plan fully funded and funded again for next year. $1 million for IFD apparatus, $250,000 increase for parks for capital needs. Many of you remember a few years ago we added $1 million to the parks budget specifically to address capital needs. We are growing that and excited to do so. $1.25 million for solid waste trucks, an increase in funding for DMD to allow them to do property acquisition for economic development initiatives, $4 million additional dollars for the DPW capital improvement program or plan, and $1.5 million for additional salt and traffic supplies. And then we are going to do an implementation of a centralized vehicle purchasing pilot. This is kind of nerdy in my game, but trying to move forward with figuring out how we replace the fleet in an effective way for our municipal vehicles. It's been a challenge. IFD's done a great job of addressing it with apparatus. I think IMPD now has a plan in place for the rest of our municipal vehicles specifically, and DPW's made incredible progress specifically on their fleet, which we're really proud of. But for the rest of the municipal fleet, we're trying to find a way to make it actually happen on an annual basis and be operationalized. Other infrastructure investments, and these are the last few slides here, $163 million for roads, resurfacing bridges, sidewalks, and trails, $107 million for stormwater, and then, of course, the Circle City Forward initiative, the bond issue that you will be hearing through the budget process this year, is funded in this budget for next year with the levy shift that we discussed earlier in the year. And so that levy shift allowed us to include that levy in the budget ordinance, and now that will generate the funding that allows us to fund these new projects in Circle City Forward. Of course, especially excited about the $25+ million in parks projects. Excited to see a corner facility, excited to see a solid waste garage get replaced. If you haven't had a chance to see some of those, I encourage all of you councilors to see the state of affairs and see the great improvement we'll be able to make. And then these last two, I won't go into great detail, but we have laid out the 2022 Transportation Capital Plan as well as the Stormwater Plan. Those will be covered in detail in the Public Works Committee later this week by Director Parker. We're really excited about what American Rescue Plan is allowing us to operationalize in that, as well as the additional $25 million in greenways that we're introducing as a fiscal. And our last slide is the 2022 proposals for council consideration. So I talked a lot about the operational budget. This is all operational budget focused, but the package as a whole includes a number of pieces. There's no way to talk through this budget without talking about the American Rescue Plan and its impact overall. And if you could, thank you. But also you will be hearing Circle City Forward Phase 1 bonds, which we talked about. You will be hearing Phase 3 fiscal. So you've already done Phase 2, the $25 million in residential streets. That was a spend down out of fund balance. We felt comfortable with our fund balance, balances where they are. This additional $25 million in this Phase 3 fiscal is specifically for greenways and trails. And the reason we're comfortable with that, again, as you saw that fund balance projections earlier, we are in an incredibly strong position to be making investments. I believe strongly that this is a time for government to be making investments in our community and showing the strength in the recovery. And actually constructing and building is a way to do that. And so we believe this is a great opportunity, and we hope the council will support it. We've talked about state rental assistance partnership. The mayor mentioned the nearly $100 million that is available to us through the state emergency rental assistance program that they have allowed us to partner with them on, and you will be hearing tonight. And the creation of the Metropolitan Emergency Services Agency will be its own ordinance proposal that will come before Public Safety Committee. Another item, which is a smaller item that is in this, is also the consolidation of the Telecom and Video Services Agency into the Information Services Agency. More and more, Channel 16 and its work over time will continue to be digital focused and less cable focused. And so as that happens, it makes sense to bring it into IT, to make it a truly part of our technology infrastructure and to support it. TVSA obviously is a very small agency. It's hard to get growth in their budget. Putting in an ISA gives them more resources they wouldn't have available to them. And of course, as the former CIO, I may be a little biased, but I am excited what it'll do for them. And then the last one, for recruiting and retention, which is an incredible challenge you will hear from every agency and department as you go through this process. You'll hear the difficulty in staffing their agencies and departments. This economy has changed things significantly. And so there are pieces of this. I'll talk a little bit in my presentation for the Office of Finance and Management tomorrow night about our salary and compensation study and the result of that to build a true living wage. Madam Leader worked on this years ago to move that number up. It's now time to review that again and move it up even further as a minimum wage within the county. So we're going to discuss that as a part of our presentation tomorrow. But in addition, adding things like parental leave that the city doesn't currently provide, looking at our retirement options to make it a more attractive place to work. These are items we need to really think through, and so we are bringing through an ordinance to discuss with the council to try to make us more competitive in the market, which is becoming a larger and larger problem for a number of our agencies departments, and I know you will hear a lot about it. I want to thank you all. I really appreciate the opportunity to go through this process with you. I'm really excited. There's nothing like talking about public finance to clear a room, but I love it. And I'm excited about what we have. This is an opportunity unlike any other for all of us to go through this. And for our citizens, it is so critical that we all engage together and make sure that we really do something that matters. This economic recovery has to be the best in Marion County that it isn't anywhere in the country, and that's our goal. And so I hope you all work with us as we go through this process together to really make a difference. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Clark, and we look forward to working closely with you as well in the coming months. The next item on our agenda is proposal number 180, referred to Metropolitan and Economic Development Committee. Chairwoman Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. President. Proposal number 180 appoints Percy Bland, Jr. to the Metropolitan Board of Zoning Appeals Division. Mr. Bland stated that he is a youth pastor at Eastern Star Church. He stated that he loves the city of Indianapolis, and he has served in various capacities throughout our community. Councilor Ine thanked Mr. Bland